Imagine a land so perfect that even the gods preferred it to Olympus, a place where spring never ended, where no one ever got sick, where people lived for 1,000 years in continuous happiness. The ancient Greeks called it Hyperborea, the realm beyond the north wind. And for over 2 millennia, it has haunted the Western imagination as the ultimate lost paradise. But here's the fascinating thing. The Greeks didn't describe Hyperborea as pure fantasy. They wrote about it the way we might describe a distant country, with specific details, named individuals, and documented trade relationships. Were they describing a real place that has been lost to history? Or were they creating something even more powerful, a mirror to show everything wrong with their own world? The story begins in the 8th century BC with Hesiod, one of the earliest Greek poets whose works have survived. In his fragmentary writings, Hesiod describes Hyperborea as existing beyond the reach of Boreas, the fierce personified north wind who brought winter's harsh bite to the Greek peninsula. Think about what that means meteorologically. Boreas wasn't just cold air to the Greeks, he was a winged deity capable of sinking ships, destroying crops, and bringing killing frosts that could devastate entire communities. His realm extended across the northern regions, encompassing the lands of Thrace and Scythia, where harsh winters originated. By positioning Hyperborea as existing beyond Boreas, Greek poets created a conceptual space that transcended normal climatic limitations, a place where the very source of winter couldn't reach. This etymological construction reveals sophisticated Greek understanding of weather patterns. Ancient observers recognized that harsh winter weather consistently arrived from northern directions, brought by cold winds sweeping down from unknown regions beyond the Black Sea and northern mountains. Boreas personified these destructive forces, and his mythological character embodied winter's unpredictable catastrophes. So a land existing beyond his reach implied a region where the fundamental causes of seasonal hardship couldn't operate, where eternal spring prevailed not through magic, but through being positioned beyond winter's geographical source. But this was just the beginning. The real details would come from Pindar, whose descriptions were so vivid that scholars are still debating whether he was describing a real place. Pindar's Olympic and Pythian odes, composed during the 5th century BC, provide the most detailed and influential descriptions of Hyperborean society that survive from classical antiquity. Picture this. His 10th Pythian ode presents a civilization existing in perfect harmony with divine will, enjoying privileges forever beyond ordinary mortals' reach. The Hyperboreans lived in continuous festival, their cities resonating with the sound of lyres and flutes, choruses of maidens performing sacred dances honoring Apollo, who spent winter months among them when he departed from his shrine at Delphi. This wasn't occasional celebration, this was their daily life. Music, dancing, and religious joy formed their primary activities, not because they were lazy, but because they'd achieved something remarkable: freedom from the survival struggle that dominated everyone else's existence. Here's what makes this truly extraordinary. The Hyperboreans enjoyed complete freedom from disease. Unlike Mediterranean populations who faced regular outbreaks of plague, fever, and ailments that could devastate entire communities, the Hyperboreans existed in perfect physical health throughout their extended lifespans. Pindar presents this immunity not as biological anomaly, but as consequence of spiritual purity and divine favor, suggesting that disease represented punishment for moral corruption rather than merely natural causes. The Hyperboreans maintained such perfect religious observance and moral conduct that the gods shielded them from physical sufferings afflicting other humans. The legendary 1,000-year lifespans weren't just long lives, they were lives spent in uninterrupted happiness, free from the anxiety about death that haunted ordinary mortals. Think about the agricultural implications. Pindar describes Hyperborea as a landscape of perpetual spring where flowers bloomed continuously, and fruit trees bore bounty throughout the year. The absence of winter eliminated the agricultural anxieties dominating Mediterranean life, where failed harvests meant famine and social upheaval. Instead, the Hyperborean environment provided abundant sustenance without requiring intensive labor. This agricultural ease allowed the population to dedicate time to artistic, religious, and intellectual pursuits rather than struggling for basic survival. Imagine having literally all your time free for music, philosophy, art, and spiritual development because food just appeared. But here's the crucial point Pindar emphasizes. The Hyperboreans achieved this blessed condition through perfect religious observance rather than technology or conquest. Their society operated according to harmony and mutual respect, guided by divine wisdom rather than human ambition. Early Greek poets consistently employed Hyperborea as a literary device to critique their own civilizations without risking political danger. By presenting detailed descriptions of Hyperborean perfection, poets could highlight contemporary problems without directly challenging powerful rulers or established institutions. The contrast between Hyperborean peace and Greek warfare, between Hyperborean health and Greek disease, between Hyperborean longevity and Greek mortality, these comparisons illuminated existing societies' shortcomings while maintaining the fiction of discussing a distant mythical realm. This literary technique proved brilliantly effective because it avoided the dangers inherent in direct social criticism while still conveying pointed observations about contemporary conditions. Poets could describe Hyperborean freedom from tyranny without explicitly condemning specific rulers, or praise Hyperborean religious purity without directly attacking corrupt priests. The mythical distance provided safe space for exploring alternative social arrangements that might prove dangerous to discuss directly. Think about how clever this was. Imagine criticizing your government by writing detailed stories about a perfect society on Mars. Everyone knows you're really talking about Earth, but you can't be executed for treason because technically you're just writing science fiction. That's exactly what Greek poets were doing with Hyperborea. The geographical positioning also served important cosmological functions. By placing this perfect realm at the northern extremity of the world, poets reinforced geographical determinism that influenced classical thinking about human societies. The idea that climate and location directly influenced human character appears throughout Greek ethnographic writing. Northern peoples characterized as brave but unsophisticated, southern populations seen as intelligent but lacking courage. Hyperborea represented an exception, a northern region combining positive qualities from different zones while avoiding their limitations. But the most powerful connection was yet to come. The link between Hyperborea and Apollo himself would transform this from mere legend into living religious tradition. The relationship between Hyperborea and Apollo represents one of Greek religion's most complex elements, establishing connections that transcended geography to create sophisticated theological frameworks linking divine presence with earthly perfection. Classical sources consistently describe Apollo's annual departure from Delphi during winter months, when the god traveled northward to spend the harsh season among the Hyperboreans in their perpetually temperate realm. This wasn't casual visiting, this was the god's preference. Apollo, divine patron of Greek civilization, actually preferred Hyperborea to Greece during winter. Think about what that implied to Greek worshippers. Even our gods find our world inadequate. The timing was precise and religiously significant. Apollo's Hyperborean sojourn corresponded exactly with the period when his oracular activities at Delphi ceased. During the 3 winter months when harsh weather made travel to Delphi difficult and agricultural activities came to standstill, Apollo departed for northern paradise where eternal spring provided an environment more suitable to his luminous nature. The Delphic priests acknowledged this divine absence by suspending oracular consultations and dedicating winter months to Dionysus, whose chthonic associations made him more appropriate for presiding over the dark season. This theological arrangement reveals sophisticated Greek understanding of seasonal religious cycles and divine specialization. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Hyperboreans allegedly maintained regular contact with Mediterranean Greek communities through an elaborate chain of intermediary peoples who transported sacred offerings across vast distances. According to Herodotus's investigations, these offerings, wrapped in wheat straw according to ancient custom, traveled through Scythian territories across various Thracian tribes through multiple Greek city-states before reaching their final destination at Apollo's shrine on Delos. Each participating people understood their sacred obligation to maintain this religious connection, suggesting widespread recognition of Hyperborean spiritual authority throughout northern regions. And the system required consistent cooperation between numerous tribes who might otherwise be hostile. The sacred nature of Hyperborean offerings apparently overcame normal political boundaries. Herodotus of Halicarnassus, writing around 440 BC, represents the first sustained attempt to examine Hyperborean traditions through empirical investigation rather than poetic acceptance. Unlike his predecessors who presented Hyperborean accounts as established truth, Herodotus approached these traditions with skeptical methodology that would define classical historiography. His treatment demonstrates the tension between inherited cultural beliefs and emerging standards of historical evidence that characterized 5th century Greek intellectual development. Basically, he was the first person to ask, but is any of this actually true? The historian dedicates substantial attention to the complex religious exchange system connecting Hyperborea to Delos, Apollo's birthplace, and one of Greece's most important religious centers. The Delians themselves preserved detailed records of these exchanges, maintaining oral traditions, identifying specific Hyperborean individuals who'd participated in the offering system. The islanders spoke of 2 Hyperborean maidens, Opis and Arge, who'd accompanied the first offerings to Delos in the distant past. These women remained on the island where they died and received heroic honors from the local population. Their graves became focal points for Delian religious observances, with local women cutting their hair in tribute and young men dedicating their first beard trimmings at the tomb sites. Here's what makes this compelling historical evidence. The precision of Delian record-keeping, including preservation of personal names and specific burial locations, suggests these exchanges represented historical realities rather than purely legendary material. The continuous nature of the offering system, maintained across multiple generations, indicates sustained diplomatic and religious relationships between Hyperborean communities and Mediterranean Greek populations. However, and this is crucial, Herodotus expresses significant skepticism about geographical claims associated with Hyperborean traditions. While acknowledging cultural and religious evidence for Hyperborean contact with the Greek world, he questions specific geographical descriptions found in earlier sources. His investigation of northern regions, based on information from Scythian informants and Greek colonists around the Black Sea, fails to identify any territory matching traditional Hyperborean descriptions. The plot thickens. The most famous Hyperborean individual in classical sources was Abaris, a mysterious figure who allegedly traveled throughout the Mediterranean world during the 7th century BC, carrying a golden arrow that served as magical implement and symbol of his northern origins. Various accounts describe Abaris as possessing supernatural powers, the ability to travel vast distances without eating, to predict earthquakes and natural disasters, to purify cities afflicted by plague or divine punishment. According to traditions, Abaris had received his golden arrow directly from Apollo during the god's residence in Hyperborea. This divine gift enabled him to travel through the air, covering enormous distances in remarkably short periods. Think about that. A man flying on a golden arrow appearing in Greek cities at moments of crisis to provide divine guidance. Multiple Greek communities preserved records of visits from a northern holy man claiming Hyperborean origins, suggesting some individual matching Abaris's basic description had indeed travelled throughout the Greek world during the specified period. The golden arrow receives particular attention in classical sources, with various authors providing different explanations for its significance. Some traditions describe it as divine gift enabling supernatural travel. Others suggest it served as sacred implement for religious ceremonies or divination. Certain accounts claim the arrow contained meteorological properties, allowing Abaris to predict weather patterns with extraordinary accuracy, a connection linking back to fundamental Hyperborean characteristics, particularly their relationship with Boreas and immunity from harsh weather. Herodotus's investigation reveals that several Greek cities maintained temples or shrines associated with Abaris's visits, suggesting his influence on Mediterranean religious practices extended beyond temporary appearances. These permanent installations indicate Greek communities found sufficient value in Abaris's teachings to establish lasting commemorative structures. Some shrines continued receiving offerings centuries after Abaris's alleged lifetime, demonstrating enduring impact of his supposed activities. But here's where Herodotus becomes skeptical. While acknowledging evidence for some historical Abaris figure, he carefully distances himself from supernatural claims, focusing on documented visits rather than miraculous powers. The historian was basically saying, yes, someone travelled around Greece claiming to be from Hyperborea. No, he probably wasn't actually flying on a magical arrow. The geographical positioning of Hyperborea became increasingly problematic as Greek knowledge of northern regions expanded through trade, colonization, and military expeditions. Herodotus's extensive research into northern territories, conducted through interviews with Scythian traders, Greek colonists, and tribal representatives, fails to identify any area matching traditional Hyperborean descriptions. The lands beyond the Black Sea, according to his informants, consisted primarily of harsh steppes, where nomadic peoples struggled against severe winters and limited agricultural opportunities. Even the Scythians, who inhabited the northernmost territories known to Mediterranean Greeks, reported that regions beyond their lands became increasingly inhospitable rather than more pleasant. Scythian accounts described vast wilderness areas where extreme cold made permanent settlement impossible, contradicting the traditional image of Hyperborea as land of perpetual warmth and abundance. These geographical investigations led Herodotus to question whether Hyperborea existed as physical location accessible through normal travel, or whether it represented spiritual or mythological concept transcending ordinary geographical categories. Think about the investigative challenge. You're trying to verify stories about a paradise in the far north, but every single person who's actually been to the far north reports its frozen wasteland. What do you conclude? Subsequent classical geographers attempted various solutions to this problem. Diodorus Siculus, writing during the 1st century BC, attempts to synthesize earlier Hyperborean traditions with contemporary geographical knowledge by presenting Hyperborea as real territory located beyond the Rhipaean Mountains, inhabited by people maintaining religious and cultural characteristics described in earlier sources while existing within more conventional geographical framework. He describes the Hyperboreans as inhabiting a large island in the Northern Ocean, roughly the size of Sicily, where climate remained temperate year-round due to favorable winds and geographical protection. His account attempts rational explanations for traditional characteristics, their longevity resulting from excellent climate rather than divine intervention, their freedom from disease stemming from pure environment rather than supernatural immunity. But the fundamental problem remained. Nobody could actually find this place. Roman encounters with Hyperborean traditions marked fundamental shifts in how classical civilization approached these northern legends, Roman authors combined respect for classical authorities with pragmatic analysis based on contemporary military and administrative experience. Ovid's treatment in his Metamorphoses demonstrates sophisticated literary techniques, adapting Greek mythological material for contemporary audiences. Writing during the Augustan period, when Roman armies actively campaigned beyond Rhine and Danube frontiers, Ovid transformed traditional Hyperborean accounts into allegories reflecting Roman experiences with northern European peoples. His description of eternal spring enjoyed by Hyperborean populations becomes metaphor for civilization's influence, suggesting imperial administration could transform harsh barbarian territories into prosperous provinces resembling legendary northern paradise. Ovid's account of Apollo's winter residence among Hyperboreans takes on new significance within Roman imperial ideology. The poet presents the god's annual journey northward as civilizing mission, bringing Mediterranean cultural values to distant territories, paralleling Roman belief that imperial expansion served to spread civilization throughout the barbarian world. The Hyperborean festivals described emphasize themes of peaceful cultural exchange and voluntary submission to divine authority, reflecting Roman preferences for diplomatic solutions over military conquest in dealing with northern European tribes. But here's the clever part. By connecting legendary Hyperborea with actual Germanic territories, Ovid was essentially saying, we Romans can create paradise through conquest and administration. Tacitus represents the culmination of Roman historical analysis of northern European peoples, providing systematic ethnographic accounts that explicitly connect contemporary Germanic and Celtic cultures with classical traditions about legendary northern realms. His Germania offers detailed descriptions of Germanic social organization, religious practices, and military customs based on information gathered through Roman diplomatic contacts and military campaigns. The historian's description of Germanic religious practices reveals sophisticated solar worship traditions corresponding closely to classical accounts of Hyperborean Apollo cult activities. Germanic communities maintained elaborate astronomical calendars, conducted seasonal festivals involving musical performances and communal celebrations, and preserved oral traditions describing divine connections with northern territories. Tacitus was basically discovering that the barbarians had remarkably sophisticated cultures that resembled the legendary Hyperboreans more than Romans wanted to admit. The collapse of Roman imperial authority during the 5th century AD created profound disruptions in how classical knowledge was preserved and interpreted, fundamentally altering medieval understanding of ancient traditions, including Hyperborean mythology. Christian chroniclers and theologians who inherited fragments of classical learning faced the complex task of reconciling pagan mythological accounts with Christian cosmological frameworks. This produced innovative reinterpretations that transformed Hyperborean legends into components of medieval Christian geography and eschatology. Basically, they had to figure out what to do with all these pagan stories about northern paradise when they now believed paradise was Eden and heaven. The earliest Christian treatments appear in works of late imperial church fathers who encountered classical geographical texts during traditional Roman education. Jerome's extensive correspondence reveals familiarity with Hyperborean references found in Virgil, Ovid, and other classical authors, whose works remained standard in late Roman schools. However, Jerome approached these mythological accounts with systematic skepticism, arguing that pagan poets had created fictional territories to glorify false gods and mislead believers away from Christian truth. His commentary consistently reinterprets mythological geography as allegory, suggesting legendary realms like Hyperborea represented spiritual rather than physical territories. Augustine's treatment in City of God establishes interpretive frameworks that profoundly influenced medieval approaches to ancient mythological material. The bishop acknowledges that classical authors possessed accurate information about distant territories and peoples, but argues their pagan religious perspectives prevented them from understanding true spiritual significance of geographical phenomena. Augustine suggests that territories described in classical sources as possessing paradisiacal conditions might represent corrupted memories of Eden or prophetic visions of celestial paradise promised to Christian believers. And this interpretive approach transforms Hyperborean legends from pagan mythology into potential components of Christian salvation history. If you can't eliminate the old stories, reinterpret them to serve your new religion. It's brilliant, really. Medieval mapmakers preserved classical information about northern European territories while organizing their cartographic presentations around Christian symbolic frameworks, placing Jerusalem at center of inhabited world. These maps frequently included references to northern territories described in classical sources, but presented them as peripheral regions where Christian influence remained limited rather than as paradisiacal realms possessing special religious significance. The Hereford Mappa Mundi, created during the late 13th century, exemplifies medieval approaches to incorporating classical geographical traditions into Christian cartographic frameworks. The map includes references to northern European peoples and territories derived from classical sources, including regions medieval scholars associated with Hyperborean traditions. However, these northern territories appear as marginal areas inhabited by monstrous peoples and supernatural beings, reflecting Christian reinterpretation of classical accounts that emphasized spiritual dangers associated with pagan lands rather than their legendary perfection. Think about how completely the interpretation had flipped. What Greeks described as perfect paradise, Christians portrayed as demon-infested wasteland. Medieval chroniclers who documented conversion of northern European peoples to Christianity frequently incorporated elements derived from classical Hyperborean traditions into their accounts of missionary activities. These chroniclers recognized that northern European peoples possessed sophisticated religious traditions and advanced cultural achievements corresponding to characteristics attributed to legendary northern realms in classical sources. Adam of Bremen's History of the Archbishops of Hamburg-Bremen, completed during the 11th century, provides detailed accounts of Scandinavian peoples and territories that explicitly connect contemporary observations with classical traditions about northern realms. Adam describes Scandinavian religious practices, social organization, and cultural achievements closely paralleling classical accounts of Hyperborean society, including sophisticated astronomical knowledge, elaborate musical traditions, and peaceful governance systems. However, he presents these characteristics as evidence of divine favor that prepared Scandinavian peoples for Christian conversion rather than as products of pagan religious excellence. The sophistication was real, but the explanation had to change to fit Christian theology. The intellectual revolution, sweeping through 15th and 16th century Europe, fundamentally transformed how scholars approached classical antiquity, creating unprecedented opportunities for rediscovering and reinterpreting ancient texts that had remained largely inaccessible during the medieval period. Renaissance humanists, driven by passion for recovering authentic classical sources and rejecting medieval scholastic interpretations, embarked on systematic campaigns to locate, translate, and analyze ancient manuscripts preserved in monastic libraries, Byzantine collections, and Islamic scholarly centers. This philological revolution brought renewed attention to classical, geographical, and mythological texts containing detailed accounts of Hyperborean traditions, enabling Renaissance scholars to encounter these ancient sources with fresh, interpretive perspectives, freed from medieval Christian allegorical frameworks. But the rediscovery of complete manuscripts of Ptolemy's geography during early 15th century provided Renaissance cartographers and geographical theorists with detailed classical accounts of northern European territories that included systematic discussions of legendary realms like Hyperborea. Ptolemaic geographical coordinates and regional descriptions offered Renaissance scholars mathematical frameworks for analyzing ancient claims about northern territories while providing empirical standards for evaluating mythological accounts against observable geographical realities. Humanist scholars approached these newly available texts with methodological rigor, emphasizing textual criticism, comparative analysis, and empirical verification rather than allegorical interpretation that had characterized medieval treatments. Marsilio Ficino's translations of Platonic and Neoplatonic texts introduced Renaissance scholars to sophisticated ancient philosophical frameworks for understanding relationships between mythological accounts and metaphysical realities. Ficino's interpretation of Platonic geography suggested that legendary territories like Hyperborea might represent archetypal realms existing within spiritual dimensions, while maintaining connections to physical geographical locations. This Neoplatonic approach enabled Renaissance scholars to take classical Hyperborean accounts seriously as sources of genuine knowledge while avoiding literal geographical interpretations that contradicted contemporary empirical observations. Basically, they figured out how to study ancient texts respectfully, without having to believe every word literally. The development of Renaissance printing technology revolutionized dissemination of classical texts containing Hyperborean material, making detailed ancient sources available to scholars throughout Europe rather than limiting access to rare manuscripts in libraries. Aldus Manutius and other pioneering publishers produced affordable editions of classical geographical and mythological works that enabled widespread scholarly engagement with ancient Hyperborean traditions. The printing revolution created scholarly communities that could engage in systematic comparative analysis of different classical sources while developing increasingly sophisticated interpretive methodologies. Suddenly, instead of one scholar reading one manuscript, hundreds could compare notes on the same text. Renaissance natural philosophers developed systematic approaches to investigating unusual climatic conditions, astronomical phenomena, and geographical anomalies that might correspond to characteristics attributed to mythical northern realms in classical sources. This empirical approach enabled scholars to separate potentially accurate observational data from obviously fictional elements within ancient accounts, while maintaining openness to the possibility that classical authors had preserved genuine information about remarkable natural phenomena. Paracelsus and other Renaissance alchemical theorists incorporated classical Hyperborean traditions into systematic investigations of natural forces and hidden properties of matter. Suggesting legendary territories might represent regions where unusual astronomical influences or geological conditions created environments particularly favorable for alchemical processes. The Renaissance fascination with Prisca Theologia, the ancient theological tradition supposedly preceding and informing all historical religious systems, provided interpretive frameworks for understanding classical Hyperborean traditions as components of universal spiritual knowledge rather than merely Greek mythological inventions. Renaissance scholars like Agostino Steuco argued that ancient pagan traditions preserved authentic elements of original divine revelation that had been gradually corrupted through historical transmission. This perspective encouraged systematic analysis of Hyperborean religious practices described in classical sources as potential evidence for ancient spiritual traditions that might complement rather than contradict Christian theological understanding. They were trying to build bridges between pagan wisdom and Christian truth. Renaissance cartographic projects undertaken by scholars like Sebastian Münster and Gerardus Mercator demonstrated systematic attempts to reconcile classical geographical accounts with contemporary empirical knowledge gained through exploration and improved astronomical observation. These cartographers incorporated classical references to northern territories while adapting them to accommodate new geographical discoveries and more accurate understanding of global spatial relationships. Renaissance maps frequently included territories derived from classical sources like Hyperborea, but positioned them within empirically grounded geographical frameworks reflecting contemporary knowledge of northern European regions. You can literally see on these maps the tension between respecting ancient authorities and acknowledging that the world looks different than the ancients thought. Martin Frobisher's expeditions to Arctic regions during the 1570s generated detailed accounts that explicitly referenced classical traditions about northern territories, while documenting contemporary observations of Arctic conditions and indigenous populations. Frobisher's chroniclers compared extreme daylight variations observed in Arctic regions with classical descriptions of northern territories where astronomical phenomena differed dramatically from Mediterranean patterns. These comparisons suggested classical authors might have possessed accurate information about Arctic conditions despite their apparently mythological presentations of northern territories. Maybe the Greeks had actually heard accurate descriptions from travelers, even if they dressed them up in mythological language. The accounts of Frobisher's encounters with Inuit populations included systematic comparisons between indigenous Arctic cultures and classical descriptions of northern peoples found in Hyperborean traditions. Renaissance chroniclers noted that Arctic indigenous peoples possessed sophisticated knowledge of astronomical phenomena, maintained elaborate oral traditions about territorial history, and demonstrated remarkable adaptation to harsh environmental conditions, enabling them to thrive in regions that would challenge Mediterranean populations. These observations encouraged speculation that classical Hyperborean accounts might have preserved accurate ethnographic information about actual northern peoples despite their legendary presentations. The more Europeans explored the Arctic, the more they found people who actually resembled the Hyperboreans in certain ways. John Dee incorporated classical Hyperborean traditions into systematic investigations of mathematical and astronomical principles governing natural phenomena. Dee's analysis of ancient geographical and astronomical texts suggested classical authors possessed sophisticated understanding of mathematical relationships influencing climatic conditions, seasonal variations, and other natural phenomena associated with different geographical regions. His mathematical approach to classical sources encouraged systematic analysis of numerical relationships and astronomical data contained within ancient accounts of legendary territories. Dee was trying to extract actual scientific data from mythological texts. Dee's cartographic projects attempted to identify specific geographical locations that might correspond to classical descriptions of Hyperborean territories based on mathematical analysis of astronomical and climatic data. His calculations suggested certain northern European or Arctic regions might experience unusual climatic conditions due to specific combinations of latitude, ocean currents, and seasonal astronomical variations that could produce environments resembling those described in classical sources. This mathematical approach enabled Renaissance scholars to take classical geographical claims seriously while subjecting them to empirical verification through contemporary observational data. The development of Renaissance occult philosophy created systematic frameworks for understanding how legendary territories like Hyperborea might exist within spiritual or astral dimensions while maintaining connections to physical geographical locations. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa developed theories about multiple levels of reality that enabled classical mythological accounts to possess genuine truth value without requiring literal geographical interpretation. This metaphysical approach suggested Hyperborean territories might exist as spiritual realities accessible through appropriate magical or contemplative practices rather than through ordinary physical travel. Basically, Hyperborea might be real but in a different dimension. The intellectual transformation sweeping across European scholarly circles during the 17th and 18th centuries fundamentally altered how learned men approached ancient traditions, including persistent legends of Hyperborea. Enlightenment scholars armed with new methodological tools derived from empirical science and comparative analysis subjected classical sources to unprecedented scrutiny while developing systematic frameworks for distinguishing between historical kernels and mythological embellishments. Francis Bacon's revolutionary approach to natural philosophy established methodological principles profoundly influencing how Enlightenment scholars analyzed classical accounts of extraordinary phenomena. Bacon's insistence on empirical verification and systematic observation provided frameworks for evaluating ancient claims about unusual geographical conditions, remarkable cultural achievements, and supernatural phenomena. Pierre Bayle's Historical and Critical Dictionary, published between 1695 and 1697, exemplified Enlightenment approaches to analyzing inherited traditions through systematic application of rational skepticism and comparative methodology. Bayle's treatment of classical geographical and mythological sources demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how ancient authors combined observational data with speculative interpretations, creating complex texts requiring careful analysis to separate potentially accurate information from obvious fictional elements. His critical examination of Hyperborean traditions established methodological standards influencing subsequent scholarly investigation throughout the 18th century. He was basically doing what we'd call fact-checking today. Bayle's analysis revealed significant inconsistencies within classical accounts of Hyperborean geography, chronology, and cultural characteristics, suggesting these traditions evolved through multiple stages of literary development rather than preserving coherent memories of actual historical experiences. His systematic comparison of different classical sources demonstrated that ancient authors frequently contradicted each other regarding fundamental aspects of Hyperborean society, indicating accounts reflected literary conventions rather than empirical geographical knowledge. Think about what this means. By carefully comparing what different ancient writers said about Hyperborea, Bayle could prove they were making stuff up, or at least embellishing heavily. The emergence of comparative philology during early 18th century provided Enlightenment scholars with powerful tools for analyzing linguistic relationships between different cultural traditions containing similar mythological elements. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz developed systematic approaches to comparing mythological terminology across different Indo-European languages, revealing patterns of linguistic relationship suggesting common origins for apparently distinct cultural traditions. These philological investigations indicated that Hyperborean-type myths appeared throughout Northern European cultures with sufficient linguistic similarity to suggest either common inheritance from shared ancestral traditions or systematic cultural borrowing between related peoples. Leibniz's analysis of Northern European mythological terminology revealed that words associated with paradisiacal northern realms shared common etymological roots across Germanic, Celtic, and Scandinavian languages, suggesting these traditions preserved memories of shared cultural experiences rather than representing independent literary inventions. His comparative linguistic research indicated ancient Northern European peoples maintained consistent conceptual frameworks for understanding ideal territorial conditions and perfect social organization, creating mythological traditions that classical Greek authors encountered and adapted for Mediterranean audiences. The Hyperborean myth might have originated with northern peoples themselves, then been borrowed by Greeks. Yet the development of Enlightenment natural history created systematic frameworks for evaluating classical claims about extraordinary natural phenomena associated with legendary territories. Natural historians like Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, applied empirical methodologies to analyzing ancient accounts of unusual climatic conditions, remarkable biological phenomena, and extraordinary geological formations that classical sources associated with northern paradisiacal realms. Buffon's systematic analysis of Northern European climatic patterns revealed that specific geographical locations could indeed experience unusually temperate conditions despite high latitudes due to oceanic influences, geothermal activity, or favorable topographical arrangements moderating harsh weather systems. Maybe the Greeks weren't entirely wrong about northern paradise after all. The systematic investigation of northern European archaeological sites during 18th century provided unprecedented empirical evidence for evaluating classical claims about advanced northern civilizations that might have inspired Hyperborean traditions. Archaeological discoveries throughout Scandinavia, northern Germany, and British Isles revealed sophisticated Bronze Age and Iron Age cultures possessing advanced metallurgical skills, elaborate religious installations, and complex social organization systems corresponding to characteristics attributed to legendary northern realms in classical sources. The excavation of megalithic monuments throughout northern Europe demonstrated that ancient northern peoples possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge and engineering capabilities, enabling them to construct elaborate religious installations requiring precise mathematical calculations. Sites like Stonehenge, Newgrange, and the stone circles of Orkney revealed that northern European cultures developed complex religious systems centered on solar worship and astronomical observation centuries before documented classical contact with these regions. And these archaeological discoveries provided empirical support for classical claims about advanced northern civilizations, while suggesting natural explanations for remarkable cultural achievements attributed to Hyperborean society. The Hyperboreans might have been real Bronze Age people with impressive astronomical knowledge. Voltaire's approach to analyzing historical traditions through rational criticism and systematic comparison established influential frameworks for distinguishing between potentially accurate historical information and obvious mythological embellishment within inherited sources. His examination of classical Hyperborean traditions revealed that these accounts served important political and cultural functions within Greek society that might have influenced how ancient authors presented geographical and ethnographic information. Voltaire noted that idealized descriptions of northern territories frequently appeared during periods of political crisis or social upheaval in Greek cities, suggesting Hyperborean traditions functioned as implicit criticisms of contemporary conditions rather than straightforward geographical accounts. Using northern paradise to criticize your own society, the ancient Greeks invented political satire. David Hume's systematic analysis of historical evidence and mythological traditions established methodological principles profoundly influencing Enlightenment approaches to evaluating extraordinary claims within inherited sources. Hume's emphasis on probabilistic reasoning and empirical verification provided frameworks for assessing the likelihood that classical accounts preserved accurate historical information versus representing literary fiction or religious propaganda. His analytical approach encouraged systematic examination of evidence supporting different interpretations of mythological traditions while maintaining appropriate skepticism about extraordinary claims contradicting contemporary empirical knowledge. Basically, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The systematic investigation of ancient trade routes during 18th century provided empirical frameworks for understanding how cultural information and mythological traditions might have been transmitted between Mediterranean civilizations and northern European peoples. Archaeological evidence for extensive Bronze Age and Iron Age trade networks connecting northern European amber sources with Mediterranean markets demonstrated that regular cultural contact existed between these regions centuries before the classical period when Hyperborean traditions first appeared in Greek literature. These trade route investigations revealed that amber, furs, precious metals, and other northern European products circulated throughout Mediterranean markets through complex transportation networks involving multiple intermediate peoples. The systematic nature of these trade relationships suggested that cultural information, including mythological traditions and religious practices, was transmitted alongside commercial goods, creating opportunities for Mediterranean peoples to encounter detailed accounts of Northern European cultural achievements and territorial conditions. Think about it. Greek merchants buying amber from northern traders would naturally ask, where does this come from? What's it like up there? And the answers they got, filtered through multiple translations and embellished with each retelling, might have become the Hyperborean legends we know today. The revolutionary archaeological discoveries of 19th and 20th centuries fundamentally transformed scholarly understanding of ancient northern European civilizations, providing unprecedented empirical evidence, challenging traditional assumptions about cultural sophistication of pre-Roman northern peoples. Heinrich Schliemann's pioneering excavations at Troy during the 1870s established methodological precedents for systematic archaeological investigation that subsequent researchers applied to northern European sites with remarkable results. The meticulous documentation techniques developed by German and Scandinavian archaeologists revealed complex Bronze Age and Iron Age societies throughout northern Europe, possessing technological capabilities, artistic achievements, and social organization systems far more advanced than classical sources had suggested. The excavation of the Nebra sky disk in 1999 near Nebra, Germany, provided concrete evidence for sophisticated astronomical knowledge among Bronze Age Central European populations dating to approximately 1600 BC. This bronze artifact, measuring 32 centimeters in diameter, displays intricate astronomical symbols including solar and lunar representations, stellar configurations, and seasonal markers demonstrating advanced understanding of celestial mechanics. The disk's sophisticated design incorporates gold inlays depicting sun, moon, and star clusters arranged according to precise astronomical calculations, enabling accurate prediction of seasonal changes and agricultural timing. This thing is basically a Bronze Age computer for tracking the seasons. Chemical analysis of the bronze composition revealed that raw materials originated from multiple European sources, indicating extensive trade networks and technological cooperation between distant Bronze Age communities. The discovery of the Trundholm sun chariot in Denmark during 1902 revealed additional evidence for elaborate solar worship practices among Scandinavian Bronze Age populations. This remarkable bronze sculpture, dating to approximately 1400 BC, depicts a horse-drawn chariot carrying a large golden disc representing the sun across the heavens. The artifact's sophisticated metallurgical construction required advanced casting techniques and precise mathematical calculations to achieve proper proportional relationships between its various components. These weren't primitive barbarians. These were skilled engineers and artists. Systematic excavation of megalithic monuments throughout northern Europe during 20th century provided extensive evidence for advanced astronomical knowledge and engineering capabilities among Neolithic and Bronze Age populations. Investigation of Stonehenge revealed that this massive stone circle was constructed according to precise astronomical alignments, enabling accurate prediction of solar and lunar cycles across multiple centuries. Radiocarbon dating indicated the construction began around 3100 BC and continued through multiple phases until approximately 1600 BC, demonstrating sustained cultural continuity and accumulated technical knowledge across numerous generations. The monument's massive trilithons required sophisticated engineering techniques and coordinated social organization involving hundreds of workers over extended periods, moving stones weighing dozens of tons without modern machinery. The Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland, constructed around 3200 BC, demonstrates even more remarkable astronomical precision in its design and orientation. Archaeological investigation revealed that the monument's entrance passage and burial chamber were aligned with mathematical precision to admit sunlight only during winter solstice sunrise, creating dramatic illumination effects that would have possessed profound religious significance for its builders. The structure's corbelled roof constructed without mortar, has remained watertight for over 5 millennia, demonstrating engineering capabilities rivaling modern construction techniques. Think about that. A building that stayed dry for 5,000 years, built by people we used to dismiss as primitives. The excavation of Bronze Age burial sites throughout Scandinavia revealed extensive evidence for sophisticated metallurgical techniques and international trade relationships connecting northern European populations with Mediterranean and Near Eastern civilizations. The Borum Eshoy burial mounds in Denmark, dating to approximately 1400 BC, contained remarkably preserved organic materials, including woolen textiles, leather garments, and wooden artifacts, demonstrating advanced craft specialization and artistic sophistication. Chemical analysis of bronze artifacts found in these burials revealed that copper originated from alpine sources while tin came from Cornwall, indicating trade networks spanning the entire European continent. Bronze Age globalization. The discovery of the Egtved girl burial in Denmark provided unprecedented insights into Bronze Age Scandinavian social organization and cultural practices. This remarkably preserved burial, dating to approximately 1370 BC, contained remains of a young woman wearing elaborate woolen clothing decorated with bronze ornaments and accompanied by grave goods indicating high social status. Isotope analysis of her teeth and hair revealed that she had traveled extensively throughout Europe during her lifetime, suggesting Bronze Age Scandinavian elites maintained regular contact with distant civilizations through established diplomatic or trade relationships. The burial's elaborate construction and rich grave goods indicated that Bronze Age Scandinavian societies possessed sufficient wealth and social stratification to support aristocratic classes comparable to those described in classical accounts of Hyperborean society. Archaeological investigation of Iron Age Scandinavian religious sites revealed extensive evidence for elaborate ceremonial complexes possessing characteristics remarkably similar to those attributed to Hyperborean religious practices in classical sources. The Apokra archaeological site in southern Sweden, occupied continuously from 1st century BC through 10th century AD, contained numerous buildings dedicated to religious ceremonies, craft production, and elite residential activities. Excavations revealed extensive deposits of sacrificial offerings, including weapons, jewelry, and agricultural products, demonstrating the site's importance as regional religious center. This was basically a Scandinavian temple complex operating for 1,000 years. The discovery of bog bodies throughout northern Europe provided dramatic evidence for sophisticated preservation techniques and elaborate ritual practices among Iron Age populations. The Tolland man, discovered in Denmark in 1950, was so remarkably preserved that archaeologists initially mistook him for a recent murder victim. Detailed forensic analysis revealed that this individual, who died around 400 BC, had been ritually strangled and deposited in bog as part of religious ceremonies. The man's peaceful facial expression and carefully arranged body position suggested he'd been willing participant in ritual sacrifice rather than victim of violence. These discoveries completely changed how we understand ancient Northern European religion. Comparative mythology studies initiated during late 19th century by scholars like Max Müller revealed systematic patterns of mythological development across Indo-European cultures, suggesting common origins for apparently distinct legendary traditions. Müller's analysis of solar mythology demonstrated that Northern European cultures possessed elaborate mythological systems centered on solar deities whose characteristics closely paralleled those attributed to Apollo in classical Hyperborean accounts. Germanic, Celtic, and Scandinavian. Mythological traditions consistently described northern paradisiacal realms where solar deities resided during winter months, creating mythological frameworks remarkably similar to classical descriptions of Apollo's Hyperborean sojourn. The linguistic analysis of Indo-European mythological terminology revealed extensive shared vocabulary relating to northern paradisiacal realms across different cultural traditions. Comparative philological research demonstrated that Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, and Baltic languages preserved common roots for words describing ideal territorial conditions, perfect social organization, and divine connections with northern regions. These linguistic similarities suggested either common inheritance from shared ancestral traditions or systematic cultural borrowing between related peoples over extended periods. The consistency of these mythological concepts across different Indo-European cultures indicated that Northern European peoples maintained remarkably stable cultural traditions, preserving detailed knowledge about ideal social and environmental conditions. The systematic documentation of Northern European folk traditions during 19th and 20th centuries revealed extensive oral literature preserving detailed accounts of northern paradisiacal realms, possessing characteristics virtually identical to those attributed to classical Hyperborea. The Brothers Grimm's collection of Germanic folk tales included numerous stories describing northern territories where perpetual spring prevailed, inhabitants enjoyed extraordinary longevity, and social harmony eliminated conflict and suffering. These folkloric accounts maintained remarkable consistency with classical Hyperborean descriptions despite having been transmitted through independent oral traditions for over millennium, the same stories told for thousands of years. Modern climatological research provided crucial insights into paleoclimatic conditions prevailing in northern Europe during periods when Hyperborean traditions allegedly originated. Ice core analysis from Greenland glaciers revealed detailed records of temperature and precipitation patterns extending back over 100,000 years, enabling precise reconstruction of climatic conditions during Bronze Age and Iron Age periods when advanced northern European civilizations flourished. These paleoclimatic data indicated that northern Europe experienced significantly warmer and more stable climatic conditions between approximately 2000 BC and 500 BC than those prevailing during subsequent historical periods. There actually was a time when the north was much warmer and more pleasant. The medieval warm period, documented through multiple paleoclimatic indicators including tree ring analysis, ice core data, and sedimentary deposits, demonstrated that northern European regions experienced unusually temperate conditions between approximately 900 and 1300 AD. During this period, agricultural settlements extended significantly further north than their modern limits, while Greenland supported substantial Norse colonies maintaining regular contact with European markets. Archaeological evidence from these Norse settlements revealed sophisticated agricultural techniques and architectural adaptations, enabling comfortable living conditions despite challenging Arctic environment. If it happened in medieval times, why not in the Bronze Age? Paleobotanical research conducted throughout northern European bog deposits and lake sediments provided detailed evidence for vegetation patterns prevailing during ancient periods when advanced northern civilizations flourished. Pollen analysis revealed that extensive deciduous forests dominated northern European landscapes during Bronze Age and early Iron Age, creating environmental conditions significantly more favorable for human settlement than those characterizing later historical periods. These warmer climatic conditions would have supported the agricultural abundance and comfortable living conditions attributed to Hyperborean society in classical sources. Maybe the Greeks weren't describing fantasy, but actual memories of a warmer epoch transmitted through trade contacts. Contemporary scholarly consensus regarding historical value of Hyperborean literature reflects sophisticated understanding of how mythological traditions can preserve genuine cultural knowledge despite apparently fictional presentations. Modern anthropologists recognize that oral traditions frequently maintain remarkable accuracy when transmitting information about geographical conditions, cultural practices, and historical events across multiple generations. This recognition has encouraged systematic analysis of classical Hyperborean accounts as potential sources of empirical information about ancient northern European civilizations rather than dismissing them as pure literary fiction. We're taking these old stories seriously again, but with better tools for analysis. The development of ethnoarchaeological methodology has provided frameworks for understanding how advanced ancient civilizations might have developed in northern European contexts without leaving extensive material remains surviving in archaeological record. Ethnographic studies of circumpolar peoples demonstrate that sophisticated cultural achievements, including advanced astronomical knowledge, elaborate artistic traditions, and complex social organization, can flourish in northern environments without requiring monumental architecture and extensive material culture characterizing Mediterranean civilizations. This recognition suggests classical accounts of advanced Hyperborean civilization might preserve accurate information about northern European cultural achievements, not necessarily preserved in archaeological contexts. The systematic investigation of circumpolar archaeological sites during 20th and 21st centuries has revealed extensive evidence for sophisticated cultural traditions throughout Arctic regions possessing characteristics corresponding to those attributed to Hyperborean society. In classical sources, archaeological sites throughout Alaska, northern Canada, Greenland, and Siberia yielded evidence for advanced technological capabilities, elaborate artistic traditions, and complex social organization among ancient Arctic populations. These discoveries suggest northern circumpolar regions supported advanced civilizations that might have served as models for idealized societies described in classical Hyperborean accounts. The farther north we explore, the more sophisticated cultures we find. The Dorset and Thule cultures of North American Arctic developed sophisticated technologies for surviving and thriving in extreme northern environments, including advanced hunting techniques, elaborate artistic traditions, and complex social organization systems enabling successful adaptation to challenging climatic conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals these Arctic peoples possessed detailed astronomical knowledge, maintained extensive trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers, and developed artistic traditions of remarkable sophistication and beauty. The cultural achievements of these Arctic civilizations demonstrate that northern regions could indeed support the advanced societies described in classical Hyperborean traditions. These people were living in conditions that would kill most of us in days, yet they created art, tracked the stars, and built thriving societies. Recent archaeological discoveries in Siberia revealed evidence for advanced Bronze Age and Iron Age civilizations possessing technological capabilities and cultural achievements comparable to those attributed to Hyperborean society. Scythian archaeological sites throughout Siberian steppes yielded elaborate burial complexes containing sophisticated metalwork, intricate textiles, and artistic objects demonstrating remarkable technical skill and aesthetic sophistication. These Siberian civilizations maintained extensive trade relationships connecting northern Asian populations with Mediterranean and Near Eastern markets, creating possibilities for cultural exchange that might have transmitted information about northern territorial conditions and cultural achievements to classical Mediterranean authors. The analysis of modern literature reveals how Hyperborean mythology has profoundly influenced literary movements from Romanticism through contemporary fantasy fiction. The Romantic poets of late 18th and early 19th centuries found in Hyperborean imagery powerful symbol for their rejection of industrial civilization and yearning for pristine natural environments uncorrupted by mechanization. Samuel Taylor. Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner draws heavily upon northern mythological traditions, creating haunting landscapes echoing classical descriptions of territories beyond normal geographical boundaries. Hyperborea became the ultimate escape from the modern world. Lord Byron's treatment of northern themes in works like Childe Harold's Pilgrimage demonstrates how Romantic authors adapted classical Hyperborean imagery to express disillusionment with contemporary European society. Byron's descriptions of northern landscapes emphasize their sublime terror and otherworldly beauty, creating poetic environments serving as refuges from moral corruption and political violence characterizing early 19th century Europe. The poet's northern territories possess eternal spring and harmonious social conditions attributed to classical Hyperborea, but transformed into Romantic frameworks emphasizing individual spiritual experience rather than collective social perfection. Same paradise, different purpose. The German Romantic movement produced particularly sophisticated adaptations of Hyperborean themes through authors like Novalis and Friedrich Hölderlin, who incorporated northern mythological elements into philosophical frameworks, emphasizing relationships between nature and consciousness. Novalis's fragmentary novel, Heinrich von Ofterdingen, includes descriptions of northern realms where poetry and music possess magical powers, transforming physical reality, creating environments paralleling classical accounts of Hyperborean artistic achievements. The Victorian fascination with Arctic exploration created new literary contexts for Hyperborean themes, as authors like Jules Verne and H. Rider Haggard incorporated northern mythological elements into adventure narratives reflecting contemporary geographical discoveries. J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth legendarium demonstrates sophisticated integration of northern European mythological traditions, including elements derived from classical Hyperborean accounts into comprehensive fictional cosmologies, preserving essential characteristics of ancient sources while adapting them for contemporary readers. Tolkien's Valinor possesses many characteristics attributed to classical Hyperborea, including perpetual spring, divine inhabitants, and freedom from death and suffering. The philologist's academic background enabled him to incorporate authentic mythological elements while creating original narratives capturing spiritual significance of ancient northern traditions for modern audiences. He understood these myths better than almost anyone, and he used that knowledge to create new myths for our age. Robert E. Howard's Conan stories frequently reference Hyperborea as ancient civilization possessing advanced magical and technological capabilities before disappearing into legendary obscurity. Howard's Hyperborean kingdoms combine classical descriptions of northern paradise with pulp fiction elements, emphasizing adventure and conflict, creating popular literary frameworks that introduced Hyperborean mythology to mass audiences throughout English-speaking world. This transformation from scholarly topic to adventure fiction demonstrates the enduring power of these ancient stories to capture imagination across different media and audiences. The ongoing study of Hyperborean traditions demonstrates their enduring significance as windows into ancient cultural exchange, mythological development, and human imagination's capacity to create powerful symbols transcending their original historical contexts. From origins in ancient Greek literature through modern manifestations in popular culture and scholarly research, these northern legends continue providing valuable insights into how societies create and maintain cultural meaning across historical boundaries. Persistence of Hyperborean imagery throughout different historical periods and cultural contexts reveals fundamental human concerns about ideal social organization, perfect environmental conditions, and harmonious relationships between human communities and divine forces. The scholarly consensus that has emerged from centuries of investigation acknowledges that Hyperborean traditions represent complex synthesis of empirical observation, cultural interpretation, and mythological imagination rather than simple fictional inventions or historical records. This understanding enables contemporary researchers to extract valuable information about ancient northern European societies while recognizing literary and cultural processes shaping how this information was preserved and transmitted. Continued study provides ongoing opportunities for understanding relationships between mythology and history, processes of cultural transmission, and enduring human fascination with territories existing beyond boundaries of ordinary experience. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reshape our understanding of ancient Northern European civilizations, with each excavation potentially revealing new evidence connecting classical Hyperborean accounts to historical realities. The sophisticated astronomical instruments, precise mathematical calculations embedded in megalithic monuments, and elaborate artistic traditions found throughout Northern European sites demonstrate that ancient Northern peoples possessed technological and intellectual capabilities approaching or exceeding those in contemporary Mediterranean civilizations. Now, these discoveries provide empirical support for classical claims about remarkable Northern cultural achievements, while suggesting Hyperborean traditions might preserve accurate information about actual historical societies rather than representing purely mythological inventions. The systematic analysis of classical sources through comparative textual criticism reveals that ancient authors frequently incorporated information derived from multiple sources when constructing accounts of distant territories and peoples. Scholars note that detailed geographical descriptions, ethnographic observations, and cultural information found in classical Hyperborean accounts often correspond to empirical data, verifiable through contemporary investigation, suggesting ancient authors had access to reliable informants possessing direct knowledge of Northern European conditions and cultural practices. This textual analysis indicates classical Hyperborean traditions represent complex synthesis of observational data, cultural interpretation, and literary elaboration rather than simple fictional inventions. The development of Enlightenment theories about cultural diffusion and historical development provided systematic frameworks for understanding how advanced civilizations might have emerged in Northern European territories and subsequently influenced Mediterranean cultural development. Scholars proposed that Northern European peoples might have developed sophisticated cultural achievements independently of Mediterranean influence, creating advanced societies that could have served as models for idealized civilizations described in classical Hyperborean accounts. Maybe civilization didn't only flow from south to north, maybe Northern peoples taught Mediterranean civilizations things too. Contemporary climatological research has revealed that Northern European regions did indeed experience periods of significantly warmer and more stable climate during Bronze Age and early Iron Age periods when classical sources suggest Hyperborean traditions originated. These paleoclimatic findings provide scientific support for possibility that northern territories could have maintained the temperate conditions and agricultural abundance described in classical accounts during specific historical periods. The combination of favorable climate, sophisticated indigenous cultures, and extensive trade networks connecting Northern Europe with Mediterranean world creates plausible historical framework for understanding how accurate information about Northern achievements might have reached Greek authors. The integration of archaeological evidence, paleoclimatic data, linguistic analysis, and comparative mythology has created increasingly sophisticated understanding of relationships between classical Hyperborean traditions and historical Northern European civilizations. While we may never definitively locate specific geographical location corresponding to Hyperborea, contemporary scholarship recognizes that these ancient accounts preserve valuable information about real cultural achievements, actual trade relationships, and genuine geographical knowledge that ancient Mediterranean peoples possessed about Northern European regions. The legends weren't pure fantasy, they were complex mixtures of fact, interpretation, aspiration, and imagination. The legacy of Hyperborea in contemporary culture demonstrates remarkable persistence of mythological traditions, continuing to provide meaningful frameworks for understanding human relationships with environment, society, and transcendence. Whether encountered through scholarly analysis, literary adaptation, or popular entertainment, these ancient northern legends continue offering powerful imagery for exploring contemporary concerns while preserving connections to cultural achievements of ancient civilizations. The ongoing vitality of Hyperborean traditions in modern contexts suggests these mythological frameworks address fundamental aspects of human experience, transcending specific historical periods or cultural boundaries. So what should we make of Hyperborea today? Was it real? The answer is both simpler and more complex than you might think. Hyperborea was real as an idea, a powerful concept that served multiple functions across thousands of years. For the ancient Greeks, it was social criticism dressed as geography, a way to talk about what was wrong with their world by describing somewhere perfect. For medieval Christians, it was a puzzle to be solved and reinterpreted. For Renaissance scholars, it was a challenge to their new empirical methods. For Romantic poets, it was escape from industrialization. And for us today, Hyperborea reminds us that our ancestors were sophisticated thinkers who encoded complex ideas in stories, that myth doesn't mean false, and that the line between fantasy and reality is often blurrier than we assume. The archaeological evidence tells us something remarkable. While we may never find a place called Hyperborea, the Bronze Age and Iron Age peoples of Northern Europe were far more advanced than anyone imagined until recently. They tracked the stars with precision, worked metal with extraordinary skill, traded across continents, and built monuments that still stand after 5 millennia. When Greek merchants encountered these northern cultures through trade networks, they heard about real achievements, astronomical knowledge, solar worship, sophisticated societies, and those real descriptions became the foundation for legendary accounts. Hyperborea was the Greeks' way of processing information about cultures they didn't fully understand, transforming anthropological observation into mythology. The enduring fascination with Hyperborea teaches us something profound about human nature. We've always needed to believe that somewhere, somehow, things could be better. A land without disease, without winter, without war, without death. This isn't just Greek fantasy. This is universal human hope given geographical form. Every culture has its paradises, its golden ages, its promised lands. Hyperborea is the European tradition's version of that eternal dream. And maybe that's the most important truth. These legends endure not because they describe places that existed, but because they describe places that should exist, places that we carry in our imaginations as blueprints for the world we want to create. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's most enduring mysteries, this exploration of how myth, history, archaeology, and human hope intertwine across millennia, subscribe to Flow of History for more deep dives into the legends that shaped civilization.